Welcome everyone. My name is Emily Becker. I work with the GROW program at Rural Cap, and we're here today with our friend Molly Cerridwen, who is just a fabulous teacher and will be giving us a little intro to herbalism and what she does in her kitchen to use plants. And this program is being brought to you, a partnership between Rural Cap. Our mission is to improve the lives of low-income Alaskans, and also with Tribes Extension, whose mission is to help tribes become food sovereign and secure.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Molly Cerridwen, and I am honored to be broadcasting from the lands of the Connect tribe of the Dena'ina Otna peoples. And I invite you all to just take a moment to reflect on the lands that you reside in and to all the resilient people that came before us. So, Koyana for being here. I'd like to honor my mother, my father, grandmother, and grandfather for passing down a lot of this knowledge and wisdom to me through years of education from the time I was a young little sapling until now. And I'd also like to explain a little bit about what I do. I work as a UPIC traditional healer, and I also work with Tribes Extension as their traditional knowledge holder. So I have studied as an herbalist since I was 6 years old and have been picking plants as long as I can remember. So today, the goal is it's an intro to herbalism. It's a kind of a 101. You're curious and you want to know how to start. And there's very many ways of approaching herbalism, from tinctures to oil infusions to tea and tisanes and infusions. So I thought we would get started with the cooking side of things because I made this beautiful bone broth, and you can see it even has some of the sediment of the bone because I double cooked it in my Instapot, and a nice fatty layer on top showing that it's nice and full of those nutrients in the marrow. We often think of herbalism as something outside of ourselves, but really herbalism is a part of our life, whether we want it or not, due to the fact that we incorporate spices into our diet. So spices such as Italian seasoning, they have oregano. Oregano is an antiviral. There's parsley, it's a nutritive. There's many other herbs that we use in our kitchen pantry that actually have medicinal purposes. And we can harness those medicinal purposes through tincturing, through infusions, and through glycerin extractions or apple cider vinegar extractions. So I have plenty of examples for you today. And my demo for today is I'm going to be making a glycerin tincture with twin flower that my sister and I harvested back in, when was it? I'll have to read the jar. The end of August, early September of this last year, 2024. So this is the twin flower, and I will be using glycerin and some distilled water to make that glycerin. But first and foremost, let's talk about menstruum. And menstruum with two U's before the M. A menstruum is a liquid used to extract nutrients and medicinal compounds from plants. So often the menstruum is alcohol, and the alcohol is a solvent. So the solvent pulls the nutrients, you can use plant or animal material, and it's dissolved in alcohol. Now, the solvent ranges for alcohol tinctures are 25 to 60% ABV. So it can go as high as 90, which 90 is how I was taught, and that's Everclear. That is no longer able to be shipped to the United States. And so you can just use a vodka, a nice clear vodka, which is 75.5% ABV. And sometimes some brands range from 40% to 75, but it has to be at least 20%. And with tinctures, we take, so here's an example of a hibiscus tincture. I put it up in July of last year, and I wish I could have a light behind it because it's such a beautiful color. And I have yet to strain it. So there are many different schools of herbalism, and I was trained by a master herbalist, Deborah McCorkle, in Fairbanks, Alaska. And she was very strict in the way that she created her tinctures. So she, for instance, oil infusions. A lot of people make oil infusions using a crock pot or some sort of heat source. She only believed in cold infusions, and that meant 6 months to a year of infusion in a cool, dark space for all the medicinal properties to be then integrated into the oil. For tinctures, again, no heat, cool, dark space, 6 months. You know, some herbalists say 6 weeks, but I tend to err on the side of longer because the longer you infuse or tincture the plant material, the longer it has to allow the menstruum, whatever liquid you're using to extract, to pull out everything, not only the topical layers, the floral scents, but also those deeper catechins and antioxidants that really support our health. So you might notice some dates on my jars, and they seem old, but once you've tinctured a product, the shelf life is 12 to 15 years. That's been proven in an alcohol tincture. It's a little bit less. It's in the 8 to 10 year range for a glycerin tincture. But glycerin tinctures are a lot easier to take because glycerin is naturally sweet. And I'm speaking of vegetable glycerin for those who might be confused as to which glycerin I'm speaking of. Now, some infusions could be called a tincture, and that would be apple cider vinegar. I still call it a tincture because I allow for a long length of time. Whereas if I'm talking about an infusion, I'm often talking about a dried plant material that I steep in water, hot water, overnight, at least 24 hours, and then that creates the infusion. So tea, tisane, very similar. Tea is the tea plant that you would brew with hot water and then remove the tea bags after about 5 minutes. A tisane is very, very similar, except you're using herbs and not black tea or white tea or green tea, because those herbs aren't within the class of the tea family. So a tisane is just another word for herbal tea. And then an infusion is a step past that into at least a 24-hour steeping of a medicinal plant in water, and then you would strain. And so it creates a stronger beverage and allows more of the nutrients, more of the medicinal compounds from the plant to infuse into the water. So with cooking, I absolutely love to incorporate herbs in my cooking, and some aren't always the ones that you find on your shelf in the supermarket. So the first one I'd like to show is this bone broth, which I kind of gave you a sneak peek. Emily has some pictures of how I made it. I first boiled the bones, as is with the meat, and then I scraped the marrow out. So marrow is very high in nutrients. It's very high in collagen. And then I keep a bag in my freezer of discarded veggies, the part of the veggies like the stem of the broccoli or the shavings of my butternut squash, or the parts of the cabbage that I maybe can't eat because I don't have enough time and it might go bad, the tops of carrots and the tops of beets. I use all that, and then I put the bones back into the, I use an Instapot. You can use a crock pot or a stove pot. And then I cooked it on high, pressure cooked for another 4 hours to allow the bones to truly soften. And that's a picture of the scooped out bone marrow. Um, it's delicious on some toast. I made some sourdough toast. And if you know what tahine is, you know it's delicious. Sprinkle a little tahine on there. There's a piece missing because I couldn't resist, but there's a great way to get collagen, which is full of protein, some healthy fats, and some carbs to allow your body to replenish its nutrients. So by making this bone broth, you're not just making the broth as a final product, you're utilizing a lot of the steps along the way to nourish yourself. And the final step before I press start, bones placed on top of my frozen veggie bag. And then I cover it with water so no bones are showing. And I put a little bit of vinegar, and the vinegar helps break down the protein bindings that hold the collagen in the bones. So once that was completed, then I went ahead and added some chaga. And so not all bone broth is going to be as dark as the bone broth that I have here on hand. It might be a little bit lighter. There's many shades. It also depends on where the moose was from or whatever animal you're using. Like a fish bone broth is going to be a lot lighter in color. But when you add chaga, it allows the medicinal properties of the chaga, and you see some ginger floating there for some flavor, because my intention with this broth was to make some pho, some Vietnamese pho noodle soup. And I made enough to make 2 pots of pho, one to bring to family who are feeling ill, and one for my family, and then 2 more jars that I canned so that I was able to preserve it so it can sit shelf stable, and I can open it up whenever I need to add some bone broth to anything that I'm cooking, or if I want more noodle soup. So
We have a couple questions, Molly. One is how much vinegar do you add?
at least a tablespoon, but I never, I, when cooking, I cook very organically. So I know I do at least a tablespoon, but often it's just a tad bit more. It's,
And another question was, do you keep the meat on the bones when you cook them?
so that's why I go through 2 cooking processes. Is the first step is to just cook the bones so that the meat and the gristle falls off and that the marrow is easy to scoop. And I hand separate bones from meat, and I set the meat off to the side, because by that point it's so tender, I can reincorporate it after the finished product. So yes, I strip the bones of all, and that's why those bones look so clean, is because I also got the gristle off, and I got all of the tendons, ligaments, all the connective tissue, including the marrow. And then after this step, where I've cooked it in vegetables, chaga, strained, the bones are so soft that they can actually crumble just by squeezing them with your hand. And I have 2 dogs and 2 cats. And so I then am able to reduce even more waste, especially food waste, which is a really important topic to me. But I crumble that bone meal into my dog's food so that no part of this animal is wasted. Everything is put to use.
What kind of vinegar do you use, white or apple cider?
You can use either, but I tend to use my apple cider vinegar. I have a great example. I've got some wild chive and nasturtium apple cider vinegar that I put up this summer, and then some nettle apple cider vinegar. So once the nettle has been infused into the apple cider vinegar, it the vinegar then takes on the properties of nettle, and nettle is very high in iron, and it's considered a pot herb, so you can't really eat too much nettle. It would take quite a lot. It would be a feat to eat so much nettle that it would make you ill. And so as a pot herb, you can make salads out of it. You can make steam, you can eat it as a foodstuff, and it also increases your iron, but there are also some antioxidants within it that help your body absorb the iron that is within the nettle. So I tend to use the vinegars that I've already made because honestly, I'm out of apple cider vinegar that's just plain because I've used the apple cider vinegar that I purchased, and I use apple cider vinegar in the raw with the mother to make my infused apple cider vinegar products. And then now that I'm out of regular plain apple cider vinegar, I'm using the products that I made so that I can add a little bit of nutrient along the way, because the cooking process isn't going to diminish the nutrients that were pulled out through the apple cider vinegar. And then I also have some nasturtium, which is just such a pretty color. So a lot of people grow nasturtium, jewel nasturtium, as a plant for decorative purposes, but it's got this really wonderful mustardy taste. So it's an edible flower. And so some people decorate their salads with it. What I do every week or so, I go out and I pick, and I have a large 64-ounce jar of apple cider vinegar that's about 3/4 full, and I add the nasturtium to that. So over the course of a couple months, I'm adding fresh flowers in and topping off the vinegar so that the water of that's within the flour doesn't displace the vinegar or the acetic acid that's within the apple cider vinegar, because it's the acetic acid within the apple cider vinegar that's actually acting as the preservative, and the acid is pulling out the nutrients. So if I want a little zestier bone broth, I would add this nasturtium vinegar. But honestly, I tend to save this for salad dressings because salad dressing, sometimes people add mustard or other different flavors. Just this with some olive oil and some black pepper is one of my favorite salad dressings of all time. So often I stick with more of the nutritive herbs like a nettle apple cider vinegar or a chive apple cider vinegar, which I also have. And I'll show you what that looks. Wild chives and apple cider vinegar.
Molly, when you're making your nasturtium vinegar, do you only use the flowers or are you using seeds and leaves also?
I only use the flowers. I've heard mixed reports on using the leaves, and they do have a place in the medicinal world, but that's not I'm going after the floral and the mustard taste and medicine. So that's that I tend to stick just to the flowers, and then I'm not harming the plant. So literally I made a gallon of this nasturtium vinegar, And it was from one plant, like one planter that had 4 nasturtium plants within it. It draped all the way down my deck, all the way to the ground. And by not harming the leaves, it continued to want to reproduce. So flowers being the reproduction process, the plant triggered it into high gear, and all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, someone's taking my flowers. I need to produce even more flowers in order to reproduce. So I only use the flowers for that.
Thanks. I can put up your next slides if you want me to do that.
Sure. Now, I'm not sure if you can see me while these slides are on, but these are black beans that I've pre-soaked. And beans everywhere, when you get them dried and in bulk, they're very dry, but it's even more so here in Alaska because it's taken so long for them to ship from wherever they've come from. So at least 24 hours, I soak the beans and then strain them and rinse them. And I add a sheet of kelp. So there are a couple of kelp farms here in Alaska. Kelp is indigenous to Alaska. And the kelp, also known as kombu, will actually help the beans cook faster, but also providing the nutrients that are inherent to kelp, which kelp is a mucilaginous plant. So it has, when it's in water, it adds almost like a, they call it mucilaginous because it's almost like a mucus liquid, but that is very healing. So think chia seeds or flax seeds. If you've ever soaked them in water and then dipped your finger into that water and felt what that water feels like, that's a mucilaginous. And it helps coat our intestinal lining so that it can prevent things like leaky gut or SIBO or other gastrointestinal issues. It's also gluten-free, so those with celiac disease can help the process. I'm not saying this is a cure. I'm not a doctor, but it is used medicinally and has been used medicinally for thousands of years to help coat the intestinal lining and help it easier for your body to absorb nutrients. So I'm adding that kelp on top, and then I'm re-cooking the beans. And it's actually the first time the beans have been cooked. It's just they look so fluffy because they've been soaked in water, probably 28 hours because you know, 24 to 48 hours, anywhere within there, as long as you're rinsing out the beans, is fine. Yeah, kelp is one of my favorites. Here's some images of some hibiscus tincture and hibiscus infusion. The tincture, it's unstrained because it's almost to the 6-month mark. Well, yeah, almost just about. So I should strain it soon, or I could let it go a little bit longer, as long as all of the plant material is covered by the alcohol. And then the hibiscus infusion I made yesterday in order to show you some kombucha that I made. I made a regular black tea kombucha, and then I made a hibiscus kombucha. So kombucha being another way of utilizing herbs. And there's another great picture of the nasturtium infused apple cider vinegar with some backlight so you can see the coloring. Delicious stuff. Mullein. So I have it tinctured both in the 75.5% alcohol and then mullein in EVU, or extra virgin olive oil. That's my acronym. And it's dried mullein. So if you notice, there is a cap on the top of that dried mullein infused oil, because if I were to use fresh herbs, I would have to consistently monitor it and push down and refill with olive oil so that none of the plant material, none of the fresh material is ever above the surface of the oil. And that creates an anaerobic environment, reducing the chance that any pathogens can get in there. So mullein is good for lung health. And this I harvested when I lived in Colorado. So some of the dates are a bit older, but I wanted a really long infusion for these because the intention for the mullein in the extra virgin olive oil was to make a salve for chest coughs, coughs that are lingering in the chest that are hard to, like, so non-productive coughs. So we've got the productive coughs where you're actually coughing things up, which is a good sign. But sometimes people get non-productive coughs where the phlegm stays. And so you can take it internally in small doses to help trigger that response of producing the phlegm to expectorate the phlegm, or you can use it externally as a salve. And actually, I do have a demo of that mullein salve that I've made with some of this that you can rub. And the lighting is bad, but I'm just going to open it because I did have a niece that was experiencing some, but it's, you know, that beautiful, gentle yellow color. And that is a mullein salve in beeswax.
And
So I use unbleached beeswax for salves.
Molly, could you talk a little bit more again about the menstruums and how you pick, like, when is it vinegar, when is it alcohol, glycerin, water, etc.?
So I go by taste. The tastier the herb, the more likely I'm to put it in an apple cider vinegar. So then I can use it as a foodstuff. When I tincture product, sometimes the herb itself can be tasty, but sometimes those herbs can be very bitter and very almost acrid on the tongue. And so by creating a very concentrated tincture with an alcohol, you can then take a little bit, we're talking 10 to 30 drops. So a dropper full holds 10 to 20 drops of the liquid. So 1 to 2 dropperfuls. I have like, so this is a blend I make, Killer Flu. And so this would be a final package. And one of these dropperfuls holds 10 to 20 drops. So when you are feeling sick for this specific blend of Killer Flu, you would then take that internally. Now, not everyone, children included, can take these alcohol tinctures. Some people, like my partner, he's 13 years sober and he doesn't want to take any tinctures. And so a way to get kids to, reap the benefits of medicinal tinctures is to cut it with boiling water. So I would take the dose in here's my water glass, a heat safe mason jar. I put the 10 to 20 drops in the bottom and then I fill it almost to the top with boiling water. And that actually burns off the alcohol and allows the medicine to stay. So then it becomes like a weak tea, and it also dilutes some of those more acrid tasting herbs that sometimes can taste unpalatable if you were to just take a bite out of it. And then that goes into glycerates. So glycerates are a glycerin extraction of a plant. And we use vegetable glycerin example. And we use that mainly for children and to add a little bit sweetness. So it's a naturally sweet menstruum. essentially. That you can also use it topically. A lot of people with skin disorders will use vegetable glycerin to help protect their skin barrier. But when used internally, it also helps protect the skin barrier. So, you know, like we were talking about the mucilaginous plants, it's coating and healing that lining as it travels through our gastrointestinal tract. So we use the glycerin as a substitute for alcohol in order to make it more palatable for kids. So if we're making like a kid's cough syrup, that would be when I would use a glycerin or glycerin tincture to increase palatability and also make it so that like that's the kids version. Or if you're sober, if your community is sober, glycerin is just great all around. And I will demo making a glycerin for you all today.
Awesome. Molly, where do you source your glycerin?
Many different sources, like it's interesting. Different companies will sell it in bulk, like by the gallon, and some will sell it in like the tiniest bottles. So, and I've also succumbed to the Amazon bandwagon occasionally. And sometimes that's the only way I can find it. Natural Pantry in Anchorage carries it, but not all the time. So I suggest getting it in large quantities because it has a long shelf life if you keep it in the 50 to 60 degree range. So cool temperatures and in a dark place. So I keep it in my cabinets at the very back, away from any heat source. So away from my heat register, away from my oven, and away from my food dehydrator. But also the companies themselves, you could buy direct from companies. This company is Aunt Patty's, and it was an organic blend, but coincidentally, it's from Malaysia. So it's not a local product. It traveled across the world to get here. And finding like companies that are creating vegetable glycerin in large enough quantities to use for herb work can be a process. So, check it out, do some research. Every time I go to reorder one I love, then I find out that I can't find it anymore. So just make sure it's an organic glycerin if you're using it internally. If you're just using it externally, that's your call, organic or not. But definitely when we're making glycerates, you want to be able to have that organic, preferably certified organic, and find, local is best. So these plants that I've put up here today are locally harvested, with a few exceptions because I travel and I work with other indigenous communities. So I'm able to travel and then harvest plants on other tribal lands. So yes, that's true with any of the products that we use in this herbalism world. Sometimes you fall in love with a specific brand or a specific tool, and then you need to replace it, and you realize you can't because either they don't make it anymore or it's been bought out by a larger company. So there's a lot of different factors.
Thanks, Molly. Do you want to show us how you're going to make the one with twin flower?
Yes. So with glycerates, when you have fresh plants, you fully cover the plant. So I have this much left over. I made some tea with it. If it was fresh, this is currently dried. If it was fresh, I would just make sure to completely cover it with about an inch from the top. Pure vegetable glycerin. You don't add any water. But this is dried. So I am going to use a ratio of 3 parts glycerin to 1 part distilled water. And this is a 16-ounce mason jar. So I pre-mixed 12 ounces of the glycerin with 4 ounces of distilled water. I'm going to give it a good shake because glycerin it's heavier weight than water, so it will sink to the bottom. Giving it a good shake. And as simple as this, I already know my jar is clean. I'm actually going to make it just directly in the jar. And if it's already in the right proportion of 3 parts glycerin to 1 part distilled water. So if I have any leftover, I can use it to sweeten my tea later. And if you can see, it bubbles really well. The glycerin loves to have these beautiful bubbles. And even if you just shake water, you will create bubbles. But the glycerin, with its heavier weight, definitely holds on to those bubbles a little bit more. So I'm covering all of this dried twin flower. And I'm going to wait a sec. I have a little tiny bit left, but not all of the liquid is absorbed in. So I'm going to I'm a big fan of stainless steel butter knives, and a staple in my herb kitchen is 90% isopropyl alcohol. So I spray all my utensils and then I give it a good wipe down. And even the jars, like when I prepped that glycerin blend of 3 parts glycerin to 1 part water, I disinfected it with this 91% isopropyl alcohol, because I don't want to introduce any pathogens, anything that could possibly harm future users or harm in the process of making it. So I'm just kind of using this tool to make sure all of the twin flower is completely covered. And it's looking pretty good. It is floating to the top, which is normal because it's dried. As it absorbs more of the glycerin and water, it will start to sink or incorporate more fully into the menstruum, which we are creating a glycerate. And so now we've just got just enough room. I can tell all of the dried parts are coated because I've went around and I've pushed them all under this liquid. And now I'm going to just top it off with the rest of that glycerate to water ratio. And reseal, give it a good shake. So it's dry, meaning I don't have to have a cheesecloth over it. I can leave this. Most herbalists say that, 4 to 6 weeks in a cool, dark place, and this glycerate will be ready to use. Twin flower is a really delicate smell and taste, so I will check it at 4 and 6 weeks. There's a pretty good chance I'm going to let it go a little bit longer. So that's as simple as that, some dried twin flower, and then the entire liquid becomes the medicine, and you strain out all of the plant material, meaning using cheesecloth. Highly recommend cheesecloth. Highly recommend the tightly woven cheesecloth. And if you have that really loose webbed, multiple layers, or clean paper towel, like when you're in a pinch and you're straining herbs. I have this food mill here. So for larger batches, I would use the food mill, and I would, layer the inside with the cheesecloth. But sometimes I just have a sieve and a funnel, and then and the weave of clean paper towel is so tight that that's actually what I use to cover my kombucha, because kombucha attracts fruit flies. It's not such a problem here in Alaska in the winter, but in the summer, the fruit flies can actually crawl through some of the webbing of cheesecloth. And the paper towel I found works wonders for that. So those would be my three options for covering a tincture that has fresh herbs or a glycerate that has fresh herbs. And then with dried herbs, you can just keep it covered.
Molly, can you talk a little bit about what the medicinal properties of twin flower?
Twin flower, my sister is also a traditional healer, Jennifer Andruli. She's been my mentor my whole life, and I give many thanks to her. She We have been harvesting many plants across Alaska for many, many years. And if anyone is familiar with the ANMC campus, there is a traditional herb garden there. Jennifer and I actually helped transplant a lot of those plants to create that herb garden. So we also do that for our home gardens. We transplant from the wild, check the laws for the land that you're harvesting from, get permission, and then you can transplant these wild medicinal plants and have them in your yard and cultivate them so that they prosper and you can harvest from your own plants, as opposed to going out into the land, possibly crossing game trails, possibly crossing public land or private land. And so we've been working a lot with spirituality, Yupik spirituality, and twin flower is used to increase spiritual awareness. It's used as a spiritual awakening. So in the ancient times, when the peoples of this planet, especially in this area in Alaska, were looking for different ways to vision, along with drum work, along with sauna, different ways of enhancing their intuition or their empathy and preventing cabin fever. Twin flower was utilized, and so that's why it's a newer herb in my arsenal, but it's an intriguing one. And so when we go into ceremony or when we go into shamanic drumming space, we will have an infusion of twin flower, and we've both noticed a difference in how our bodies react and working with the brain chemistry, because we don't, as Indigenous Alaskans, have a lot of plants that are considered psychoactive. This is not considered a psychoactive plant, but how it works on the dendrites of the brain is really fascinating. And so it actually allows your body to create its own DMT, which is naturally occurring in every human being. And back in the old days, when we didn't have artificial lighting, our body after 3 to 5 days starts creating its own DMT, and that creates visions. So visions of past, present, future. And so now there's this whole thing about darkroom therapy. And that, that's a whole other subject. But with this twin flower, it also activates those same receptors that we already have within our brain and allows us to produce the DMT, so we can get into an altered state of consciousness without the use of illegal substances, without the use of other very popular medicines that are used by people throughout the world. And it's a plant that grows in the bogs and marshes all across Alaska. So it's one more that we've been researching, playing with, and we dried it in July and have been making infusions with it. And so I don't like to keep dried herbs for too long. So once it gets to a couple months after I've dried the rest I will put up into some sort of menstruum to kind of protect any of the medicine left in the plant. And so for an example of, like, I had so much peppermint this year, but I love peppermint tea. And so I buy these dry packets that you can actually reuse. If you have a dehydrator and they get moisture in them, you can dehydrate it. So if I shake this, you can kind of see in there, I've got this food safe, basically a silicate package that absorbs the moisture. So this will increase the shelf life of the dried herbs that you're using. And so, dandelion leaf. I love having dandelion leaf tea. It is an acquired taste, but yeah, if I shake it up, there is a little, I have different size packets, but there is a packet in there to help reduce the moisture, because it's the moisture that will cause the rot. And then here's an example of red clover. As you can see, I've been using a lot of red clover in my tea infusions. My sister is newly pregnant. Red clover is a great herb to help pre, post, peri, all parts of childbirth, and actually all parts of the reproductive cycle. Red clover is one of those herbs that help nourish us as women, and it is nourishing for men as well. So one of my favorites, and it grows almost everywhere here in Alaska.
So Molly, I know we only have about 7 minutes left. Do you want me to show the garlic pictures, or what would you like to finish with?
I'll show the finished product first. So this
Okay.
is minced garlic covered in olive oil. And now you can show the pictures and I'll speak. So this was introduced to me. It's fresh raw garlic. Get all of the paper lining off, and then I mince it very, very finely. If you have one of those slap chops, those are pretty amazing, but I broke mine, so this was all hand diced. And then you cover at least an inch, but preferably a little bit more, with olive oil. And then you cap it and you leave it for a couple days just so that it can infuse. It's an oil infusion of garlic, and garlic is an antiviral, many medicinal properties. But then after those 3 days, you place it in the fridge and it lasts, I mean, almost forever. I don't think I've ever seen it go bad. And then perhaps that's because I eat it so quickly. But if you're getting a scratchy sore throat, you can take a tablespoon of this. If your child is getting a scratchy sore throat or starting to feel the effects of possible illness creeping in, this is a very potent antiviral, antifungal, and it's also delicious. So the oil, olive oil at refrigerator temperature, which is just above freezing, should be at least in the late 30s, early 40s. That solidifies into almost like an olive oil butter. So you don't just have to use it as a preventative or as an herb, to take while sick. You can also use it as a foodstuff. You can make garlic bread with it or put it on a piece of toast, and it's like instant, delicious garlic bread. It's one of my favorite easy general health herbal kitchen products. Like, really delicious. So it's technically a cold infusion, and I was taught, as I said before, all oil infusions should be cold infusions. And you might notice if you've ever cooked with olive oil, it changes taste and flavor when you get it to a certain temperature. So, especially when we're working with olive oil, we don't want to heat it. And most of my oil infusions utilize olive oil. Occasionally, when I know that I want to make a salve with, say, like the mullein, I might use avocado oil because that has a higher smoke point. So I know that when I'm heating up the oil to melt the beeswax in, that the taste of or the smell of the oil isn't going to change because it's avocado at a higher smoke point, whereas extra virgin olive oil has a very low smoke point. So this is especially for families with kiddos, get them used to garlic at a young age. And uh, the cure for garlic breath is just make sure whoever you're giving a kiss to, make sure they eat the garlic too, and no one will know any different. I was actually speaking to a old Nona grandma, and her advice to her granddaughters was to see what their partners ordered at dinner so that they could know how much garlic to eat in their dinner, so that they wouldn't smell garlic on their breath. I just love that story because I live by it. I basically just feed my partner garlic, and then he never knows I smell like garlic all the time.
Molly, that's reminding me. I feel like I've read warnings about garlic and oil, like you can't store it outside the refrigerator. Is that right?
Yeah, I would not store it outside of the refrigerator. You can ferment garlic in honey, but honey has different antibiotic properties. So no, I keep this in the fridge at 3 days max on the shelf. And then you move it into the refrigerator and you keep it in the refrigerator. And then it's like a butter that you would, scoop out with a knife, and it stays in the refrigerator once you've made it.
Awesome. There are a few additional questions on different topics. And please let me know if I've missed any of your questions. I don't certainly haven't intended to. Do you ever work with birch polypore?
Birch polypore.
And Tia, if you want to unmute yourself, you can explain. I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, no, I do work with birch, and I've made some distillates of birch for its mentholated properties. But polypore, I'm not familiar. So
No
maybe
worries. It's also has antiviral properties, and so I was thinking about it with the garlic. But the Cabinet of Wonders that's dark, and I realized that I had left some polypore in an alcohol infusion for a little bit longer than I had expected, and I just wasn't sure if it is safe to use anymore. And so I was just wondering if you had familiarity with it, but if not, that's okay.
is the polypore a part of the birch's reproductive cycle? Is it like a part of that?
No, it's a fungus that grows on dying birch to help break the birch down. Um, I mean, it's been used medicinally, I think, for like 5,000 years. So it's got a long track record.
So it's not the chaga.
No, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I just want to throw out there, we were speaking about chaga. Interior Alaska is full of aspen forests. And with the chaga craze from like 2015, I noticed a lot of people were harvesting chaga off of aspen. And that is not, it can actually be very harmful to your health. You only want to harvest chaga off of birch trees. So I'm putting it out there. If you know someone who's harvesting chaga, or you yourself are harvesting chaga, make sure it is from a birch tree, because the birch does have medicine in it that the chaga is absorbing. So it's technically the same type of fungus, but it's not the medicinal fungus that we would use for our medicine.
Molly, what's your favorite reference book on identifying plants and herbal medicines and this kind of topic?
Well, when I was a youth, my first herbal book was by Susan Weed, and it was called The Wise Woman's Herbal. And one of the reasons I love it is because she focuses on all the plants that we consider weeds. And she gives them like a personality, like Dandelion is he French, and he is very like showy, and like Violet's so sweet and calming, and chickweed is the little star child who just wants to help everybody. And so that was like a great introductory book to me. And I've read it since as an adult and still thoroughly enjoyed it. Like you can read it cover to cover, and it's almost like a novel of fiction. Like it's a nonfiction novel talking about these plants as entities. And I really love that about it. There are many different, Anne Peter Royden, I'm probably butchering her name. Any of her books are wonderful. The wellness, gosh, Emily, you have such a better memory for
And actually, what was the name of the book you mentioned again?
Anne Royden.
No, your favorite book from as a kid. Yeah.
Wise Woman Herbal by
Okay.
Speed.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I feel like you do need a library of books for Alaska. There's Janice Schofield, Discovering Alaska Plants, and then the different regional books, Denying Plant Lore, and then you need a whole library.
I mean, I have a whole, I could bring it out and show
I know.
but
Yeah, it's tough.
yeah, it is. And different authors focus on different like medicinal constituents or different regions of Alaska. So, it's like I was in Walmart of all places looking at their Alaska memorabilia to send to some out of state, in-laws. And they had a really cool pocket berry identifier that was, fit in your backpack and very accurate, very good descriptors. There's a couple new books that came out. Emily introduced me to one of them. The names are escaping me. But yes, a lot of new authors coming out with really good, well-researched information. So shout out to Rural Cap and UAF Tribes Extension, because also within that framework, there is research being done in ethnobotany of Alaska Native plants. And they're finding that the purposes that Alaska Natives use these plants for have significant medical validity to it. And so it's these new books that are being written less as an abstract and more from this proven scientific studies showing what these plants do and how similar it is to how it was used by Alaska Natives throughout our long history here on these lands.
Thanks, Molly. I'm gonna stop the recording, but I will stick around because the chat's a little bit on fire. So I'm just gonna stop the recording here.
Diana, thank you.